Well, Fee, welcome back this month, the last of 2025. Cecil, your monthly exploration of photographic exhibitions. What have you been seeing this week and how are you?
I'm hi Grant, hi everybody. I'm fine, thank you very much. And yeah, I've been seeing quite a few exhibitions, photography exhibitions on at the moment, but I've shortlisted three that I think will be of interest. I thought this month, as you say, last of 2025, we're going to talk about fashion and war.
Well, there's an unusual combination, but as we've both decided to bring Christmas early in our clothing, perhaps fashion is an appropriate place to start.
I thought either that or kind of like pumpkin spice, I don't know. But yeah, fashion and war. So the big fashion exhibition that's on at the moment is Cecil Beaton's Fashionable World, which is on at the National Portrait Gallery in London. It's on until the 11th of January, and it is, they say, I'm reading from my notes here, the first exhibition to exclusively spotlight Cecil Beaton's groundbreaking fashion works. So,
You know, I've already got a problem with that statement.
yeah.
And I know you, I'm sure you're going to have a problem with that statement, but I don't want to lead the witness.
Try me.
Well, you know, Beaton, it's funny, Beaton at the National Portrait Gallery for me is one of the most sort of important exhibitions. But when it was first shown in 1967, when Roy Strong was curating it, and then I can kind of see it was the first major exhibition of a photographer in the UK in an institution like the MPG. That was groundbreaking. But it's 2025. I'm going to leave it there. Please continue.
Yeah. Okay. You leave it there. I think my answer to that would be new generations, people who were not able to see it, people who weren't in the country in 1900 and whenever the Roy Strong exhibition
Well, that
was.
was 1967. I was three. I was in London, but my point isn't really that. Oh, you say what you're going to say. I've just got
Okay.
so much to say about this.
All right.
I
Okay.
should
All
be
right.
quiet.
Okay, let me just talk about the exhibition first of all, and tell people a bit about the exhibition. Okay, so the bits that you can find on the website. I mean, there's over 200 items displayed. There's a lot of prints. There are his paintings and drawings as well. There are pictures of him as well as pictures by him. There's some very nice three-dimensional things. Are you getting airplane sounds? Do you want me to stop?
No, you keep going.
All
We
right.
love an airplane sound on the podcast.
An airplane. We are live. We are real. And as they say, they call it the first exhibition to exclusively spotlight his groundbreaking fashion work. But actually, it's a balance. You've got the fashion photography, you've got his drawings and photographs, and I really came away with a sense not just of the fashion bit, but very much of his life, um, and very much of the fact that his art was his life. He came across in this exhibition as more likable than sometimes Cecil Beaton does when you read his or read his comments, read the things his quotes and so on. And you come away, as I say, the feeling that his life was his art. There's about his friends, his family, all the stuff that people know about Cecil Beaton. But the other thing I really came away with is his sheer inventiveness of his photography. Um, so it's not a huge exhibition, and I'm delighted to say I went on Friday evening and it wasn't massively full. It was pleasantly full. It certainly wasn't empty by any means, but you could see the art. You could see the pictures. You could walk around in comfort, which, as you know, I've been complaining about a bit
Yes,
recently.
you do like to have a little bit of ability to see the work.
I do like to actually not have to crane too much to see the work. And it's lovely. There are different eras in different rooms, of course. So it starts off with the sort of the bright young things photography in the 1930s and so on. Beautiful black and white prints of the society goes of his sisters, Baba and Nancy, pictures of his mother, pictures of all his friends and of him and his friends. Um, Stephen Tennant holding this up for anyone who's looking on it, this kind of thing, Stephen and Cecil together. Um, It continues on through his work for Vogue. It does show lots of fashion photography that he did for Vogue in the UK, in England rather, and in New York, and his work in the US. He shot for Vanity Fair and so on, and then of course he went out to Hollywood. It shows his pictures for the films and theater for My Fair Lady, the theater, the costume design he did, and it moves into his color work as well. And I just think it's beautifully put together. It is beautifully curated. You have little pieces and you have very, very big pieces. And some of the work has been seen before. People who know about Beaton will be very familiar with some of it. People who don't, I think, will just be enchanted by it. And the kind of things that I really loved were, in fact, the biggest color ones, which I don't think are really necessarily what he's most recognized for. But there's a picture of Nina DeVoe in a Balmain ball gown from 1951, which I'll put on my Instagram at some point. Oh my God, I literally just gasped when I saw it. There are pictures that he shot of models in front of there's Jackson Pollock paintings,
Hmm.
which are pretty well known. But just to see these sort of like a meter high is wonderful.
You
It's
weren't
just
aware of those pictures before?
I was aware of them, but I've only ever seen them in books.
Yeah,
And this is
yeah.
one of those, this is one of those occasions when actually the difference between seeing it in a book many times and seeing it for real actually makes a big difference.
Hmm.
So I found that, and things like there's a very, very well-known Cecil Beaton picture of the Charles James ball gown picture, which has sort of a dozen models standing in a beautiful classical drawing room, and they're all wearing ball gowns
It's
by Charles
probably one of
James.
his most famous pictures, I would
Exactly,
say.
it probably is, and that picture is blown up to the size of the wall when you walk in, and actually, just the scale really makes a big difference.
You know, I find myself really torn about this because I've read I'm sure you've read Hugo Vickers' biography of Beaton, which
Uh,
is, you're going to
I
grab
have
it.
uh,
There you go.
I have two. I have two. I have the unexpurgated Beaton, and I have Beaton in the 60s. Two
There
of
we
the
go.
W's here.
So, so, you know, we're aware of him, we're aware of the history, we're aware of all of that stuff. And I have no problem with Beaton. And I have to say, I do recommend, I used to have all of the books that he produced, including the books in the Second World War and his Second World War coverage with the beautiful illustrations on the cover and all of that kind of stuff. That's all great. The problem I have is when these things are put forward that his fashion was groundbreaking, because it really wasn't. You know, if you look at Claude Coffin as an example of a really truly groundbreaking fashion photographer coming out of the 1930s, you know, I think in a sense, Beaton was always a bit stuck in the 1930s and then kind of followed on what else was going on and had a rebirth in the late 50s and 1960s with his friendships with the Rolling Stones and all of that kind of stuff. And I think if you really want to understand Beaton, you have to watch the David Bailey documentary, which Bailey made in the early 1970s. He
Mhm.
made one with Beaton, which is available on YouTube, which is really worth watching. And he also made one with Andy Warhol, um, which is also worth watching. But I'm just very torn about this idea of constantly seeing the same photographers being kind of deified, and so many other photographers being forgotten. And it feels incredibly safe.
Well,
Have I
uh,
got that out? I've got that out of my system, I
you've got
think.
that out of your system. What am I going to say to that? When I say, well, I would love a Henry Clark exhibition. I'd
Yeah,
love a Claude Coffin exhibition. I'd love a Tony Frizzell exhibition. All of these kind of things. Love them all. But
I'd love to
it,
see a Louise Dahl Wolf exhibition. You know, if you're going to go for this, then go for it. But it's just, oh.
I wouldn't disagree that it'd be brilliant to see all of these exhibitions, but I suspect there's nobody going to the National Portrait Gallery and saying, "Here, do you want Louise or do you want Cecil?" I
But I
suspect
think, but no, but I think it's their job to
to
go
buy
out.
another.
Yeah, to go out there and be take a few more risks. I mean, I cannot remember how many times people have said to me about the Avedon exhibition at the National Portrait in the 90s and
Hmm.
how influential that was. And it really was, and I'm not saying we need another Avedon exhibition necessarily, but with the National Portrait Gallery, surely it should be pushing more buttons. And it's lovely that it's well presented, and it's probably a lovely thing to see pre-Christmas, and it's all makes you feel all warm inside. But can you understand? I'm looking for
I
a bit more
totally, I
Anakin.
I hear you, and I actually don't disagree with you. However, I'm still going to defend this on the grounds that it's a great exhibition. Okay, he's just one person, and he is, what is it, a fashion personality?
But but
There
is
was an
he
article about
even that? I mean, you know,
like Lee
gosh,
Miller. It's a bit of a Lee Miller thing again, though, isn't it?
yes, it is absolutely a Lee Miller thing.
Yeah.
And I feel conflicted by both because as a man of a certain age, I'm really interested in these exhibitions. And I will go and see them before Christmas and so forth. And that will be lovely. But as somebody who's passionate about photography and recognizes what else is out there, I want other things to be shown because I don't think the Cecil Beaton photography does anything to progress photography.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I Let's take that from the point of view of not being a man of a certain age, or indeed a woman of a certain age who has that. We talked last time about who are exhibitions for, and that
Yeah.
they should be for young people as well, and people who don't know about photography, and people who aren't familiar, who haven't seen all the Cecil Beaton work and what have you. One of the things, like I said, I mentioned his inventiveness. Okay, now you say he wasn't that groundbreaking, but he was inventive. He did things to make pictures that I walked around and thought, you know something? This is so much more fun and so much more creative than using bloody Midjourney or something.
Yeah, but I think that's quite an extreme reaction, really. I mean, because I think that he would have used Midjourney. I think there were certain pictures that you talk about those pictures he did in the States in front of the abstract expressionist art, and then there are other pictures he did with painted backdrops and what have you,
Yeah.
um, which are great, but they're of their time,
Mhm.
But at the same time, there were photographers like Saul Leiter who were doing that with fashion at the same time, and I just think that he was very good at looking around and riding what was happening. If you look at that early work, it's George Horrell, it's George Hoonigan Hume. It's
Hmm.
that. If you look at the 60s work, to me, it does remind me of kind of early Saul Leiter fashion photography, the stuff that most people don't know, or Henry Clark.
Well, fair enough. But the thing is that if you, for people who are not, who feel that they're not interested in Cecil Beaton, then don't go to the exhibition. The thing is about this exhibition, for people who A, are interested, B, don't know anything, C, are being dragged or pushed there by their lecturers or whoever, or us arguing about it and said, well, what's all that about? Um, it it does actually present ideas in ways that I still think are relevant. I still think it's relevant to make paper flowers out of cut scissors. The picture I'm holding up at the moment, Anime Wong, photographed with sort of like little streamers of paper garlands behind her. Just kind of simple, basic things that were creative and inventive and very well done. They were really simple. It wasn't. Yeah, you're probably right. He would probably be using Midjourney and ChatGPT now. But like I was saying earlier, about by the time this the podcast comes out, either it will have stopped or everyone will be talking about the Annie Leibovitz cover for American Vogue, which is Timothy Chalamet on a sort of like a collapsing universe in the background. Now, if Cecil Beaton had done that, he would have made a papier-mâché moon.
Well,
And
yeah.
it would have been so much better.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's getting it right in camera. It's that phraseology. I mean, we're going way off here, but we kind of not, I don't think. I think if we're going to look at Beaton as an influence in fashion photography, we need to look at Tim Walker because there
Yes.
are direct comparisons there. But Tim would make the props.
Well, funnily enough, funny you should say that, but I did mention that to Robin Muir, the curator, and Robin said, yes, Tim Walker would do that and he'd make the prop.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
exactly that. But I also think it's interesting that Robin is the curator because Robin was, I should say, the photo editor at Vogue for many, many years, and he started off in the Vogue library before sort of going up, being allowed out of the darkness where the library was in the basement. Um, and but Robin has that aesthetic that Beaton has. Um, and I can imagine him creating an incredibly tasteful and well presented exhibition. I'm going to be really straight and honest here. I think that doing it is boring. And that's the problem I have with
o-
it.
okay. You think it's boring. I don't think it's boring at all. I found it.
That's why you're on the podcast. We
Exactly.
mustn't
I
agree.
don't think it boring at all. I think it's so also found it soothing after a very stressful kind of week as we've all been having
But
recently.
this is what I'm saying to you. It's a warm hug.
It isn't exactly a warm hug. It's a sort of like it's a gentle meander through loveliness. It's
Okay.
not really a hug. It's not a warm hug. But it is soothing and lovely. And I just found it a lovely exhibition to go and see for those reasons. But more, I would urge people to go and see it simply to remind them you can do really original good things. I think it's important in 2025 to remember that simplicity and a really basic approach, sometimes if done well, can actually give you something really original. It was original. Well, all right, let's say you're going to argue about original, but can actually give you something really that stands the test of time, something that meaningful, something that will make people smile 80 years later.
Well, on that we are agreed because there is nothing worse to me than photographers jumping onto a fashion um, bandwagon of creating something within an aesthetic or whatever just because everyone else is doing it.
Yeah.
I'm there for that. That's for sure. Okay, so that's Cecil Beaton. It's on
Yeah.
at the National Portrait Gallery. If you can't get along to it, there is so much Beaton online. There is the documentary feature film,
Yeah.
which I could also recommend that people check out. I have to say, I did
Many,
for
many books. This is one that I have loved, Cecil, A Journey with Cecil Beaton by Lisa Imodino Vreeland.
yeah, I mean, there is no shortage of beaten books cheap on every eBay and, well, they used to be cheap. I presume they're still cheap.
Possibly not so cheap. But if you can get along, ignore Grant and go along because there's nothing like seeing these prints big. It's one of those exhibitions where actually you really benefit from
Okay.
seeing them big.
All right. Well, let's not get into
All
the
right.
not everything has to be good, big to be good. But anyway, what else have you been viewing?
All right. Okay. So, from the fact. Oh, and of course, the thing is, as you mentioned, he also shot war. He also it doesn't only have his fashion stuff. It mostly has his fashion stuff, but of course, he also shot the war. He shot he photographed in war zones and the theater of war. And there's a little bit of that in there. But from that, I think the next one to talk about is Boris Mikhailov
Well,
in
your time in Russia and Moscow means you can pronounce that much better than I could.
I'm trying to pronounce it in Ukrainian and I'm failing.
Okay.
But anyway, he's at the it is Ukrainian Diary, it's called. It's at the Photographers Gallery, and it is on until February next year. So Boris Mikhailov, Ukrainian photographer. But obviously, he was born in 1938 when Ukraine was was basically part of the Soviet Union. Or he grew up in the Soviet Union. He grew up in a Soviet system. This is the first major UK retrospective of his work. And I don't know, how familiar are you with
Well,
Buddy?
very familiar, but back with all of that very raw color work around, particularly around alcoholism in Russia. And the book, there was a book that came out of that. So yeah, I'm very aware of his work. I'm very surprised that this is the first major retrospective because he must be in his early 70s, late
Well,
60s.
he's born in 1938, so
Oh, well,
there
in
you
that
go.
case, he's 87.
There you go. That's what it says here.
Yeah,
25th of August, 1938. I was also surprised that it was first major British retrospective. I've seen tons of his stuff over the years,
yeah.
but then I've seen it in other places as well. There was a big thing. He had a big thing in Paris Photo a few years back. I remember hearing him talk, and he was very funny. Um, but he is somebody whose photography I'm very well aware of because, as you say, I did spend time living in Russia many times back in the days before it invaded Ukraine. He little bit more background for people who don't know about him. So he grew up in the Soviet Union in Kharkiv, I think it mostly was. He worked in a factory. He was given a camera to document working in the factory, like Robert Doisneau. But instead of taking nice pictures of the people he was working with, he took nudes of his wife. And the KGB found out because he was developing the nudes of his wife in the factory darkroom, and he got fired. And that was the
I
beginning.
like him all the more.
And that was kind of like from there, it's been that has been the tenor of his life ever since. He documented and continues to document life in Eastern Europe as particularly as the Soviet Union was crumbling and coming crashing down. So yes, alcoholism, homelessness, social disintegration. And the thing is that because he grew up in the Soviet Union and the system, which was very disciplined and very in order was enforced and rigid aesthetic rules were enforced and people were you had to paint within the lines. And Boris Mikhailov very much didn't do that, has never done that. He was a rebel. He doesn't have a single style of photography. He does black and white, he does color, he has different weight. He does studio, who does landscape, he does all kinds of things. And what the exhibition does is it shows several works from several different projects of his over the years. Now, I kind of went in thinking, oh yeah, I know stuff really well. I'm not that bothered, but I definitely want to check it out. And I wasn't expecting much, and I was incredibly moved. So I know I'm just talking about how wonderful Beaton is, and the Beaton exhibition is wonderful, but I wasn't moved quite in the same way, and I don't
No,
quite
because
understand
I think what I
why.
think, well, because I think that Beaton, sort of talk over you, but I think that Beaton is purely, this is the problem I have with Beaton. It's all about surface. Whereas with Mikhailov, you're going deeper there. He's actually trying to do something more than just say, don't we live in a lovely butterfly world?
I mean, possibly. I think there are different reasons for it, and I think because the thing is, that, as I say, I've been aware of his work for many years, I, but I've never actually been excited by it enough to think, oh yeah, terrific, there's an exhibition, I'll go and see it. And I was surprised at how moving I found it. And one of the things I felt when I walked around it was I hadn't thought about how influential he was in the 90s and early 2000s. So I was living in Russia in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I had a lot of friends from Germany and Austria and Switzerland, as well as Russians, as well as other Eastern Europeans. And now I look back and I think I can see how the kind of photography, the attitude. So there's a series of pictures he shot black and white of people in I think it's in Kharkiv bathing on the banks of the river with sort of with factories. The water is kind of filthy and polluted. Um, it's scruffy, and the people are cropped, the images are cropped, so really awkward cropping, but they have a real strength. You look at them now, they look really, the word authentic is coming out, which is a stupid word, but they look really strong. And I look back at the stuff I was looking at that people were shooting in the early 2000s, and it was very influential. And the other thing is his color work. You mentioned his color work.
Mm.
It's very sort of scrappy, overexposed, underexposed, saturated color and stuff. And again, in the early 2000s, we had a real thing for lomography in Eastern Europe. And I can look back now and I can see it was that aesthetic that he was doing to document his world that people were very influenced by. So it's got a lot of different bits of different projects in it. And I found it very moving. And it might be also partly, of course, because of where we are in history now.
Well, I
Again.
was going to say, I mean, I've always found that his work has a raw energy,
Mm.
which you can't. That's why I was sort of saying against the Beaton. I think you can take Beaton or leave Beaton. But with his work, I'm not even going to say his second name, but with Boris's work, um, you kind of, it does force you to question. It does force you to sort of think, what is going on there?
Yeah.
And I think also, as you quite rightly say, with the situation with Ukraine now, we now know so much more in the UK, certainly, about the Ukraine than we did previously. I think it was just kind of one of those countries over there,
Yeah.
whereas this has really brought it home literally to us. And we all probably know Ukrainian people. I know a lot more Ukrainian people now than I ever knew
Exactly. And
before.
I think the thing is that because a lot, maybe for me, it helps a little bit to have the more distance to look at these works and go, and I find the homelessness and the and just the breakdown of size. I now find it sad and touching and moving, whereas before I found it a little bit eye rolly. I don't know. So I would be fascinated for any of your listeners who go to see what they make of it, if they find it just what they make of it. I'm like I say, surprised at how moved I was by the whole thing.
Well, I think it's a very interesting day. What you do is you go to see the Cecil Beaton, and then you have a 15-minute walk across Soho to the Photographer's Gallery,
Hmm.
and you do a kind of chalk and cheese, yin and yang kind of appreciation of the two exhibitions, and then you let us know which moved you, what you think, and whether or not you think we're right or wrong.
You might need a large coffee in between.
Well, in the past that was quite a difficult thing. Now it's difficult not to
Yeah,
trip
exactly.
over a coffee doing that walk. Um, but yeah, and I think it's also interesting that the Photographers Gallery are putting on an exhibition like that because I think they seem to have moved a lot more towards a documentary
Mm.
approach and away from a conceptual contemporary practice approach, which I think a lot of people found alienating.
Mm.
Speaking personally, I definitely did. So I think it's great that they are bringing that work. I can see Boris's work having an influence on young photographic minds, much more so than Beaton's.
I think again, I'm going to talk about the just about the curation of it and the way it's displayed again. It's actually, again, it is very well done. And
How
I do
many
think
rooms
that
is it at the Photographer's Gallery?
there's two floors,
Right.
two floors. And it doesn't, again, it doesn't feel, but because you've got so many different things going, it's one of those exhibitions where if it wasn't carefully sectioned, you could kind of feel a little torn by what you're looking at. But actually, it's very succinctly presented, I would say. And it makes, I think it makes sense of the different approaches he has to his work, to his way of taking photographs. Um, but yeah, he's a very what the phrase is, the photographer who didn't look away is, I think, one of the phrases they use about him. I I would love to hear what people think of it.
Have they framed the work in glass? Are they small prints? Is it quite a traditional exhibition?
All kinds
Uh,
of things. Different sizes, different finishes. Again, And when did I go? I went midweek earlier in the week, and it wasn't terribly busy, but it's quite busy. Photographers gallery is always busy these days, which is good.
Mm.
Um, very visible, but like I say, very nicely done, very accessible in different ways. And they have a bit of a video screening thing as well. So
But I think that's interesting, Fee. We've come to the end of the year and we've spoken quite a bit over the year. And I'm sure that when we get to our New Year special with you, Bill, and myself, this will crop up again, which is the way in which photography is being shown now is far more multimedia, multifaceted. So instead of thinking that a photographic exhibition has to be a series of small prints behind glass, all in a line,
mm,
that seems to have gone out of the window. The idea of artifacts has come in a lot more,
yeah.
and so has the idea of a screen and a bench and sitting down and watching something.
Yeah, definitely. Although obviously it depends on the material. And I would think the thing about Buddies is like, yeah, he's in his 80s. It must be unusual to have a photographer of that age whose media is adaptable. It can be seen in so many different ways. I mean, uh, think of most 80 something photographers is going to be lovely black and white prints or whatever. You're not going to get the multimedia thing. But yeah, I think part of the reason for that must be that we're more used to the idea of exhibitions and events as being experiences, and people want experience. When you don't want to be passive, you want to interact in some way with the experience. So I think that's part of it. But shall I talk about my third exhibition?
Yes, please.
Okay, because this will be over by the time the podcast comes out, I think. However, it doesn't matter at all because you can go and see it online. And it's another fashion war, Vogue Ukraine. So, Vogue Ukraine, which anyone who follows me on my excuse me, Instagram account will know is something I'm very passionate about. We launched Vogue in Ukraine in 2013, I think it was, and and they managed to keep going. They still put a magazine out, not every month, but they put a magazine out despite the war, despite everything. And you can order the magazine and you can get it shipped from Kiev to London or wherever you are. But they put together an exhibition in the Saatchi Gallery in London, and it's part of an initiative for young photographers, for young Ukrainian photographers. So, Photo Vogue. Photo Vogue, the international photography platform online for mostly young photographers. Um, it's part of that. What they did is they set up, I think they set it up last year, a section on Vogue Ukraine or supported by Vogue Ukraine. And so they do exhibitions every now and then, but you can look at it on the website. I'll give you the URL for people to have a look at.
Yeah, we'll
So
put that in the show notes.
yeah, absolutely. It's not on the Vogue Ukraine website per se. It's on a website called Futurespective, and that is what the exhibition is. So, in one of the rooms in the Saatchi Gallery, you have 34 Ukrainian photographers, um, established and emerging talent. The photographs are historical evidence and a monument to the present. Well, never mind all that. But there's some portraits, there's location, there's art pictures, there's all kinds of documentary. It's a real mix of types of work, but the standard is very high. And there's a certain uniformity in the attitude that comes through,
What
which
is
I
that?
think,
What is that attitude? And what do you mean by standard being high? How are you judging that?
yeah, well, the standards being high to me is that everything I looked at, I thought that's good.
Okay.
That's good. So
It's a subjective
it is
standard.
subjective, but also the attitude. So I feel that when you look at we've talked, I think we talked last year about the Information Front, which is a Ukrainian photographic
Yeah, we
publication.
did.
And there is a great deal of energy and passion in Ukrainian photography. There are a lot of young of Ukrainian photographers, not just young ones, old ones as well, that we see. And the sort of attitude, if obviously I shouldn't kind of lump everyone together, but I always feel there's a freshness and there's a sort of casual contemporary style that comes through a lot. Um,
Do you
I
think, sorry, Fee, but do you think that's something separate? I mean, I often think that there's very much an American approach, there's a UK approach, without a doubt. There's definitely a Northern European approach
Yeah.
and a Southern European approach. Do you feel that that's fitting within what we might perceive as an Eastern European approach, or do you feel that's separate from that?
Well, this is a very good question. And the thing is, it's tricky because to me it feels very Ukrainian. Now, the first time I went to Ukraine was in 2013. And I remember being struck by um, Kiev Fashion Week, looking at the fashion designers, because I'd been the art director of Russian Vogue living in Moscow twice before that. So I was very familiar with Russian fashion, Russian photography. And I remember going to Kiev and from Moscow in between and thinking, gosh, it's so different. The feel is very, very different. And feel also that the style of photography that I see when I see Ukrainian photography feels very specifically Ukrainian, but I could be,
But what does that mean?
yeah, like I say, it means there's a casualness to it, which you don't, would, the, it, it, okay, I'm gonna say this, but don't at me anybody for saying this. I feel that if I was to say the difference between Ukrainian photography and Russian photography, which I haven't, of going back a few years, and East German photography and some other things as well, is that with the Ukrainian, a lot of what I see is light and bright, and there's a light-heartedness even when you're looking at pictures of grim things. Whereas with Russian photography, and again, this is don't at me anybody. I
No,
know
but
it's not all
these are
right,
just broad brushstrokes. That's perfectly acceptable.
very broad brushstrokes. My feeling is, my association is more. It tends to be there tends to be a darkness and how can I say stodginess without saying stodginess, but more staid, a less
It's
lightweight.
kind of safe.
Um, Not safe, but heavy.
Okay.
And when I think of sort of Austrian and these German, and again, I'm very much sort of like going from a sample size, but it tends to be more edgy. So if you go from sort of in Central Middle Europe edgy to Eastern Europe heavy to towards Western Eastern Europe lighter and lighter.
Yeah, I know what you mean because both of us have art directed in Germany, so we
Yeah,
have experience there.
yeah.
I've art directed in France also, so we have a little bit of international sort of understanding of this.
Also
So that's
bias,
int
international bias, let's
yeah.
say.
Well, I think it's important just to say that. We're not just
Yeah, yeah.
sitting in the UK, saying these things, but that's
I,
interesting, and I wonder if there's a certain kind of a um,
self-selecting group.
well, yeah, but also, out of tragedy comes positivity,
I,
perhaps. I don't know. It's very difficult. You never want to speak for other people. I never want to speak for other people.
yeah.
But I can imagine that a need for positivity.
Um, Absolutely. And the people behind so the launch of the exhibition, um lots of old Ukrainian friends there, including the publisher of Vogue Ukraine, and they are very passionate about um the role of a fashion magazine when your country's been invaded by Russia. And the role of it is to bring people um, hope and positivity and support and to champion your people to the outside world as well and to themselves. And so obviously one of the things that happens when you're looking at photography from a country, or calling it photography from a country, is it is selected by a small number of people who obviously must be making this differences between I'll have this, I won't have that. I can't. By no means is every photographer in one country, in any way, shape, or form, especially a big country like Ukraine, doing the same thing. So the aesthetic I know is not necessarily a national aesthetic. It's a curated aesthetic
Mm.
that you kind of label with the country. Nonetheless, having said all that, it feels holistic and looking at the work, I feel it feels coherent. So it's either so take that as you may. But on the website, you've got the finalists, you've got examples of various people's work. It's a very good place to have a look and start getting to know young and not so young Ukrainian photographers if you're interested in that.
Sounds great. I think there's also something that was just crossing my mind there, which is that obviously we both come from that fashion magazine background, which I think that a lot of photographers or people will have a very set idea about what that means. But actually, the reality of the history of those titles, I mean, both Beaton and Lee Miller photographed for Vogue during the Second World War.
Exactly.
Um, and they have all covered uh, situations of conflict and issues throughout their history. So I think it's really important that we recognize that just because the word Vogue means something to some people, it should, at its best, rather than at its worst, be a lot more than just a shopping list of expensive luxury brands. It should be culturally reflective and important. And I think that's what a lot of the Vogues outside of the UK and the US they seem to understand that.
Yes.
And they seem to be doing that. So that's another place I think to check out interesting photography. Vogue Portugal, Vogue Ukraine, and I'm sure you could name some others worth checking out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I mean, Vogue Italy always has been,
Of course.
um, it still is, but looking further back as well. Czech Vogue, certainly has been as well. Vogue Adria, which is the newest one at the moment. Vogue Scandinavia, Vogue Singapore, Vogue Hong Kong. My friends in Vogue Hong Kong. Um, all of them. Exactly as you say, it's not just about fashion brands. And the exhibition, Futurespective, is not really, it's not a fashion exhibition at all. It's not pictures of people in frocks. There are people living their lives. There's portraits, there's the thing that's open on my desk and it's called Temporary Homes, and it's this beautiful couple who are lying on a bed. There's still life. There's all kinds of things, different things. It's photography at in some ways purist in that they're just using photography to document real life that's all around them in slightly different ways and show us what real life is. And it's not necessarily all the same as what you see on Sky News at 10 o'clock at night. There's other things as well.
What a lovely way to end. As always, brought to a beautiful conclusion. So, listen, Fee, thanks very much for that. When does the Ukrainian one finish in at the Saatchi?
It finishes Versace on the 16th of November. So,
Okay.
yeah. However, as I say, this is not unlike going back to Cecil. If you can see Cecil on the walls, see Cecil on the walls. To be honest, the vague Ukraine thing, you'll get a really great impression and be able to go down lots of rabbit holes if you just look on the website.
Yeah, and as always, if you're not aware of these photographers that we've spoken about, you can check them out online. You can buy books. There's all sorts of other ways in which you connect with them. As I mentioned, you will be joining us for our New Year special in January, where yourself, myself, and Bill will be shooting the breeze.
Shooting the
So
breeze, as long as it's just the breeze that we're shooting, we'll be fine.
it would definitely just be the breeze. Thank you so much again. I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Pleasure. Thanks a million, Grant. Bye for now.